Ultimate Wolverine starts killing the X-Men, and it's amazing. Dude, this comic is so good. So we are back with the Ultimate Universe, because all you guys really seem to care about is the Ultimate Universe in Marvel and Absolute in DC. Everything else is just kind of, whatever. So this introduction with Ultimate Wolverine is phenomenal because it's kind of a blend between the People's Protectorate, Department X, and the Siberia Force from the Soviet Union. And I'll explain what that means as we get further into it, because those are all groups and organizations that existed in Marvel. So one of the things that goes on here is that this kind of takes place separate from everything that we've seen so far, where you have like the Illuminati behind the scenes. We're kind of waiting for the Maker to return. Jonathan Hickman is writing a new event this year, coming out in the summer, I think, and hopefully it involves this. But this whole story takes place in Russia, and it largely just involves what it is that the Soviets doing. Specifically, what you end up doing is picking up near the border of Eurasia and Latveria. Now remember, Reed Richards was manipulated by the Maker and really kind of transformed into Doctor Doom. So Doctor Doom doesn't really rule Latveria in the Ultimate Universe the way that he does in the main Marvel Universe, but it makes no real difference here because this is now a haven for the mutant population. One thing to be aware of, yes, Marvel is writing the Ultimate X-Men with Peach Momoko, but the reception to it, as far as I understand it, has been kind of lukewarm. So I don't really know how long that's going to go on for, which is a shame because it's the comic that I love to read and just not talk about because, I love that sometimes. But there's these rumors and things that go around when it comes to like the Winter Soldier, right? One of the guys says that he'd heard he was part of an experiment gone wrong in the North America Union, that one of the guys in the infantry said that he's pieced together from corpses of other soldiers who died in combat that Wolverine can't die. So it's one of these things where his kind of legend precedes him, so to speak, right? Stories get told about the nature of him, so much so that when he does something as innocuous as just standing up, the other soldiers are terrified, right? And they initially think he's going to kill him, but he's like, I got more important things to worry about. And then Marvel takes a page out of Captain America from the Winter Soldier where he jumps out of a plane with no parachute. And they're like, he doesn't have a chute, right? The only thing that we're missing here is Crossbones saying, yeah, he does that sometimes. But the cool thing is, like, when he shows up here, what you end up doing is following this story as it kind of bounces around a little bit, right? So initially there was some kind of a skirmish, presumably the mission that he was sent on. And then he turned out to be a survivor. He's ultimately hunted down by these guys and shot. And I think that's one of the coolest things about the nature of Ultimate Wolverine. He's not really depicted as Wolverine is depicted in the main Marvel Universe, where he's almost like this unstoppable force. And very rarely does anybody ever get the upper hand on him. Instead, this Ultimate Universe is much like the original in Marvel. It's a lot more grounded. It's a lot more tangible. So this depiction of Wolverine is kind of what you would expect. Really more in line with what you've seen from Hugh Jackman in the movies. He goes into a place, he does some stuff, he probably gets shot to pieces, maybe blown up, but his healing factor takes care of the rest, and he comes back out the other side. And so what you end up doing is picking up in almost this kind of camp, so to speak, right? Where he literally like crash lands down into this place. Now it is kind of nuts when he shows up here because it almost kind of seems to bounce back and forth, but then we end up figuring out he's actually here specifically for Mystique and for Nightcrawler. And there's a reason for that. And we'll talk about that here in a second because that's where Siberia Force and those little groups come into play. But he's been sent here to kill these guys. And of course, Nightcrawler here is not as powerful as he's going to be in Marvel Rivals because the developers don't know anything about him. So they just will probably give him insane levels of power like they did with Iron Fist. But the fact is, right, what you end up doing is picking up with kind of the experiment that led to him being created to a degree in the first place. Now, what's interesting about this is that we covered this with the quote unquote origin video, which is really more of a backup feature to an existing comic. This, of course, gives us a lot more information. And one of the things that it reveals here is that we're seemingly, Peach Momoko is kind of writing some of the X-Men characters. The real meat and potatoes of the team just kind of operate out here and are effectively in hiding. But the nature of this is that this guy, right, Wolverine, as they talk about him, they say, this is the same specimen who survived an airstrike on an opposition compound outside Rasputingrad and a bullet at point blank range to the temple. He regenerated his whole body in record time and had strength enough to kill the soldier who shot him. And so initially, where you have Arcady Rasputin here, right, Omega Red, Normally, he and Wolverine are like the worst of enemies when it comes to the main Marvel Universe. In this reality, Omega Red is just kind of like, I dig this guy, right? I mean, it's one of the cool changes that they're making here in the Ultimate Universe. That Omega Red is just kind of like, I mean, this dude's pretty interesting. And so ultimately, they kind of continue on with their conversation, right? Subject originates from the North American Union, like some of the other opposition forces, though it hasn't spoken since we brought it to Moscow. And so that's where you get Colossus chiming in here, right? What can we do with this? Now, one of the things that I love about the way they're depicting Colossus in this particular comic, he feels very similar to Age of Apocalypse Colossus. He's a lot more brutal, he's a lot more cutthroat, not nearly as kindly and caring as you would normally expect to see Cyclops behave in Marvel Comics. Because in the main Marvel Universe, he is, right? He's a very compassionate guy. He only kills when he really has to, that sort of thing. But again, the Doctor chimes in and says, we have attempted skeletal enhancement before, as you know, and that's where Colossus is yes, and it's routinely failed. We cannot permit another such failure. And so this again really kind of seems to lend credence to the idea that Wolverine is sort of this program, or part of this program, that's almost like an updated blend between Siberia Force and the People's Protectorate and these different, organizations that exist out there. So a little bit of history here in Marvel Comics, and you guys are going to love this, right? So most of you guys know here in the States, in the Marvel Universe, that we got the Avengers, right? They show up on the scene, they do all kinds of cool stuff. You have programs like Weapons Plus, which is basically a joint venture between the United States CIA and Canada's Department H to essentially create super soldiers in the aftermath of Captain America being believed to have been dead. Well, the idea to kind of expand on that in terms of what the Soviet Union was doing in the main Marvel Universe is that when Weapons Plus and Weapon X started to manifest in the States, the Soviets responded in kind. Specifically, they created Department X. Now, Department X was largely a KGB program, and that's what gave us like the Black Widows, right? The Red Room, different things like that. Wolverine was kind of part and parcel to it to a degree, insofar as he was a guy that helped them fight and helped them train on how to become better killers. I think he trained Black Widow's father. I'm not 100% sure about that, but he did have a hand in building the training regimen for the Red Room. Now, on top of that, you have the People's Protectorate and Siberia Force. Now, the People's Protectorate was basically a government-sanctioned superhero team. So for those of you guys who have been reading Marvel Comics for a really long time, think X-Factor in the 1990s after the original end of the Louise and Walter Simonson run, right? So like 1993 running up until the relaunch of the X-Men when Multiple Man ended up leading X-Factor and they became like a detective team, right, in the mid-2000s. But that goes into the idea of Siberia Force. Now, Siberia Force was a team that was brought together from the mutants who were left alive, which is to say the Soviet Union looked at the X-Men and mutants in the United States and realized how credible of a threat they could be to the Soviet Empire if they chose to turn against the Soviet government. So for the most part, they were all hunted down and killed. Those who were not killed were conscripted into service. Kind of a fun fact here, Colossus was supposed to be conscripted into Siberia Force, but Xavier showed up in time and rescued Colossus, and Peter went on to join the X-Men. So literally Xavier saved him from a fate worse than death, and most likely saved the X-Men from future calamity, because who knows what would have looked like if Colossus had been a bad guy. But the point is, right, all those little things were coming together in Marvel to kind of create this international superhero landscape to a degree. The Winter Guard is a combination of the People's Protectorate and Siberia Force merged into one group. But what you're seeing here is seemingly a combination of all those things, right? Siberia Force, People's Protectorate, Department X, Weapons Plus, all sort of merged together. Now, we don't really know the back end. We don't know what happened in North America that led to Wolverine becoming Wolverine. We know that Captain America is not there in the traditional sense. At least he was only recently discovered by Tony Stark and Doctor Doom, and he's been whisked off to the future. So the idea of Marvel using the original Ultimate Universe origin for Wolverine is highly unlikely here, right? If you don't know what that means, it's not a great big huge deal. It's just Wolverine became a super soldier around the same time that Captain America did. But the bigger point is they're kind of asking the question, like, what do we do, right? They say, like, this is all just kind of crazy and wild, but the response is, for now, yes. But what this specimen has that other specimen lack is simple. Instinct. He's a survivor. An example, we tried to administer a sedative 4 times. 4 times, we lost the technician. This guy killed him each and every time. Wolverine was just kind of that almost mindless and somewhat feral, and you'll see why here in a little bit. And the response of Colossus, then he cannot be controlled. This specimen is useless. So a very cold and calculating Colossus compared to what we're used to. But the doctor chimes in and says, but I think you forget, it is not the only specimen that we have here. And the question is asked, are you talking about the telepath? And she says, for starters, yes. Now, either they're talking about Jean or they're talking about Xavier. We don't fully know yet, but the statement's made, once we have it under control, I do not think the opposition will be a problem much longer. And that is quite useful. So again, this is a really interesting piece of information because what you do is you jump back or kind of jump forward to when Wolverine crash landed in this place and is attacking Nightcrawler and Mystique. And that's where Nightcrawler's like, I know this guy. Like, Raven, we need to get out of here as fast as we can. If we do not leave here, we are going to die. But at the end of the day, Mystique's just like fire, right? She ends up shooting the place up and trying to kill Wolverine. As you guys would expect, it doesn't work. And so all Nightcrawler can really do here is just read people their rights because he knows everybody's going to die. And that's what happens. They all start to get massacred piece by piece. And Wolverine does not care who he kills. His job is to kill everybody. And so as Nightcrawler is delivering these rights to everyone, Mystique takes off. Now, of course, Wolverine chases after her, and then Colossus appears out of nowhere, right? Opposition rats are swarming all over this place. Wolverine sniffs her out immediately, realizes it's her, slashes her throat, and that's the end of that. So it's really wild, right? Just how hardcore this dude is. And he just walks away, leaving Mystique just bleeding to death. And so at that point, he finally catches up with Nightcrawler, and Nightcrawler's just kind of like, oh God. And that's when you switch over to the back end, right? With Colossus and these guys experimenting on him again. That Wolverine has finally been brought under control, right? They have him chained, that kind of thing. It's like precautions. Its mind is empty, ours for the molding. So again, they constantly refer to Wolverine as it. They never really refer to him as a human being in any meaningful way, but they say its allegiance will only be to the Eurasian Republic. And the response, yes, Colossus, its memories have been wiped completely. It will not even know its own name. But that instinct, its survival instinct, will remain. You will not find another specimen like it. Close, maybe, but this specimen is truly unique. Its past self is dead. Logan, it was once called, but no more. We have taken to calling it by a nickname it seemed fitting. Lived, died, and born again as we choose. It will be cold-blooded, relentless, and merciless. We call it our Winter Soldier. So again, very much building on the idea of Bucky Barnes, but you can see how the Ultimate Universe is pulling on all these threads from the main Marvel Universe, all these programs, these initiatives, things like that, and consolidating them all down. And it's fantastic. It's absolutely awesome the way that Marvel's doing this, right? And so ultimately, Nightcrawler kind of gives us this huge revelation. He's like, if you are who I think you are, and I know that you are who I think you are, I know it's you. I don't know what they've done to you, but this is not you. It's me, Kurt. Please, I beg of you, do not kill me. I do not wish to fight. But ultimately, Wolverine goes on the move. And Kurt does the only thing he can do. He says, I'm sorry, but do not let his tears trick you. He's not crying for Logan. He's crying for himself because he knows the best he can do here is buy time, because he says, forgive me, but I do what I must. And he starts teleporting around while shooting Wolverine at the same time. It's one of the reasons why Nightcrawler, if he's written correctly, is arguably one of the deadliest superheroes in the entirety of Marvel Comics. No doubt he's going to be ridiculously overpowered in Marvel Rivals, but he is wildly powerful. Being able to teleport, and he can teleport whatever he's touching, meaning he can teleport parts of people. It's how he killed Wade Wilson in Age of Apocalypse by teleporting his head off. So there's all kinds of crazy stuff that he can do in Marvel. But again, none of it matters, none of it works. Wolverine gets the upper hand and actually predicts where Nightcrawler is going to teleport and then catches him off guard. and then kills him. Now, a lot of that's likely due to the nature of Nightcrawler's teleportation, which is to say, when he jumps from one location to the next, he actually travels through a place called the Brimstone Dimension. And when that happens, he emerges with almost a kind of like charcoal burned smell to him. So if you can follow that scent, you know exactly where it is that he's going to go. And with someone whose senses are as acute as Wolverine's, it makes perfect sense that he would be able to track Nightcrawler's movements, figure out where he jumped to by where he's about to emerge, and then react just in time, fast enough to kill him. And so that's where Nightcrawler is like, I'm sorry. He says, if you're in there, my friend, I pray that you have the strength. I'm sorry that we were not quick enough. We came back. We came back for you. We would always come back for you. And Nightcrawler essentially dies. And so what this seems to put forward here is that Wolverine was a part of the mutant resistance in Eurasia. And it's one of the big things that Marvel's kind of talked about behind the scenes, that yes, you have the Hulk and the Illuminati and all those guys that kind of rule the world in secret, but there are pockets of resistance all over the world. A lot of those resistance forces are fighting a war of attrition, right? It's just endless forces that they're always going against. They never really have a chance to win, and that's it. But the traditional X-Men, or what you and I would call the X-Men, kind of seem to be operating as almost a disbanded resistance force that exists out there. And so Wolverine, of course, catching up to these guys, takes these guys out. But it seems like he was one of them at one point in time. And that's when you jump back to the mental conditioning. Again, all of this kind of existing as a way to brainwash him. And they show him Nightcrawler and Mystique, and they say, these are your targets. They are bad guys, right? The difference is we know how to win. Look at these two, escaped 2 years ago from the East Berlin camp. They could have been part of the solution like you, part of history, given themselves their bodies, their abilities for the Republic. Instead, they're running away, but not you. You are a fighter. And so again, it's mental conditioning within the Soviet Empire. But the way this ends is that there almost kind of seems a glimpse, or maybe a little bit of a tease, that Wolverine is slowly starting to figure himself out. And that's one of the big differences between someone like Bucky Barnes and somebody like Wolverine. Mental conditioning for Logan can be a difficult thing to do. The reality here is that when it came to Logan's mind being so screwed up, a lot of that wasn't really so much the fact that his memories were all being wiped away and systematically replaced. They were. But the reality of what was going on was that he had so many memories in his head, he didn't know which ones were true and which ones were not. Now, over the years, that's waxed and waned. Marvel's written stories where he lost his memories entirely, right? So he doesn't remember anything about his actual past, which really seems to be the definitive explanation for Marvel, especially given the aftermath of House of M. Scarlet Witch took away everybody's powers, and one of the benefits, if you want to call it that, for Wolverine is he remembered his entire history. But the fact is, right, I mean, it's one of these things with his character, we don't know whether he truly remembers. It may simply just be the mental conditioning is too strong, and there's no way for it to be overcome. But with that being said, guys, we're going to bring this to an end. Let me know what you think down in the comments section, man, because this story is fire, and I'm so excited for issue number 2 to come out next month. But I will catch you all later. Peace.